if you were to advise someone who want to shift towards Microsoft Power Automate, or rather we can say Power Platform, from other RPA tools, right? Yeah. They might be expert in one of the RPA tools and they want to switch over, considering the opportunities that Microsoft Power Automate or Power Platform has. So what would you advise? Like how they can go ahead with this?
Yeah, well, the tricky thing in here is that there's no real way to, or at least there are some ways, but they're expensive to actually migrate an existing solution, for instance, from a different tool to Power Automate. So there is no migrator tool or something like that that's free of charge. I know of one company that actually does these sort of migrations. It's called Blueprint, and it's not specifically migrations to or for or from Power Automate. It's just, they specialize in migrations between RPA tools. Okay, so that's kind of a thing. But I'm pretty sure I haven't really spoken to them in terms of pricing, but I assume that it's enterprise levels of software kind of a thing. It might be quite pricey. But the way I see this, and we have actually done a couple of those, migrations, not very large scale migrations. We would usually approach it by just, essentially reviewing the actual process and usually rebuilding it, but taking into account what is actually, not really rebuilding it as it's in the previous tool, but just doing it as a sort of a new kind of a project. Maybe obviously reviewing the code that has been used, because maybe whoever built it will have found a way to interact with an interface in a better way than maybe the user could explain it. But we'd still essentially do it as a new project where we review the process, we make it as efficient as possible, and then we just build it as a new project. And we feel that's usually easier and faster to do than trying to replicate the same code that's built by someone else in a different tool.
Yeah.
Because it is usually outdated. It does not necessarily was not necessarily built by an actually experienced developer. It could just be done as this process automation thing without really improving the process. And you could just find out a lot of things along the way that shouldn't be done the way it's been done. So our approach here is really just doing it as a new project, taking into account all of the documentation and code that has actually been produced, but not really staying too attached to it.
Okay. Yeah, this is from the organization perspective, but if from a developer perspective, if someone wants to upskill, right, and move into Power Automate, so what would be your suggestions or your advice?
Yeah, from that perspective, I'd say that what I've seen, and I've actually trained several developers myself who came from being an RPA developer using a different tool. So I've trained a couple former Automation Anywhere developers. I've trained at least one UiPath developer to become a Power Automate developer. And to be honest, the one thing I noticed was that when they know one RPA tool well enough to be considered at least a mid-level developer and not just a beginner, they're usually quite quick to transition to a different tool, because under the hood they're all mostly the same. It's just the interface. If they're actually experienced and if they know their tool well enough, they will usually transition to a new tool much faster, regardless of what tool they're transitioning to. They'll transition much faster than whoever is a fresher starting up. So all you need to do is just learn to use the interface. Make it something that that you're familiar with. Maybe go through some basic training. And there's plenty online for Power Automate. There's the Microsoft Learn tutorials available. There's plenty of videos available online. So something to get through the basics. Maybe even use the recorder once to actually learn the actions available. But just to learn the actions, and that's it. And if you're already familiar with a different RPA tool, then that's pretty straightforward. The thing that is trickier is the cloud flows part of Power Automate, because it works different from any RPA tool. What I would suggest usually for someone wanting to learn Power Automate, I'd suggest starting with learning desktop flows, because those will usually be more similar to whatever they've been building in other tools. And then when you're familiar enough and confident enough with Power Automate Desktop, then add Power Automate Cloud Flows on top. Especially because desktop is actually free to use for Windows 10 and 11 users. On a personal account, you can just do as much playing around as you want.
So the idea here is people have to put in a lot of hands-on. I mean, rather than learning theoretically or just hopping around the tools, they should practice more in order to get hang of the interface of the tool.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not a big fan of certificates, to be honest. I don't have any Microsoft certificates myself because I don't care about them. I'm planning on getting some just because they are sometimes needed. To be a part of it and to maybe be accepted to speak in an event or something like that. That's just a way to showcase the skill. But really, I don't care about them in terms of actual, being a developer. I don't trust people who have a lot of certificates unless they also have years of experience. So experience is much more valuable than certificates, especially when it comes to desktop flows and Power Automate desktop flows. There is no hands-on training available that will just show you how to build the desktop flows. So that's a thing that's just you basically have to learn it from yourself or from your peers, just by doing. But there's plenty of resources on that. So do that. Play around as much as possible. Try to replicate a project you've built with a different tool, or build something for personal use, and that's all there is to it.
Yeah. So how do I see the certification practice? Like, I also keep on getting a lot of queries and DMs from the fresh graduates or someone who is aspiring RP developer. So they say, like, if we do this certification, do we get the job? So it's not about doing the certification. The certification would help you to shortlist your profile. I mean, but not to get you the interview. I mean, not to clear. You cannot clear an interview just by mentioning that you have a certificate in one tool or some other tool. Yeah. So that's how it should be perceived.
Yeah, the way I see it is that a certificate is a good addition when you have to an actual experience you can showcase and a portfolio of projects you've built. But the certificate alone will never get a job. And personally, I would not even shortlist a person who has a certificate but does not have at least a year of experience, because that just shows that they're focused on getting a certificate rather than actually doing something. If there is at least a year of experience in using a tool, then a certificate is a good addition to that. I'm not saying that I don't hire anyone with less than a year of experience. I'm just saying that having less than a year of experience is fine for a junior role or an entry-level role. It's just that at that point, a certificate will not really give you any extra points. In
that case, they should be building some projects, maybe for personal use. If we know that they are college grads, so they do not have an enterprise-level experience, but at least they can build some personal automations or personal use cases, and they can put it over some platform or design a portfolio. So that speaks for themselves.
Yeah, exactly. I'd value that much more than any certificate.
Okay, right. So moving on to the RP implementation challenges, like can you share some of the common challenges or hurdles which are faced by the first timers? Like, since you had an experience working with the Robo version, right, or the initial the people who wanted to try it out the automation for the first time. So what were the challenges? Like, what are the common myths or misconceptions around automation or RPA?
Yeah, well, I've got quite a few of those, but I think the major one is the fact that a lot of people actually come to us asking to automate a process. Their idea is that automation somehow equals process improvement, meaning that they've got an inefficient process and they think that the only way to make it efficient is by automating it. And they just, they come over to us and ask us if they've got a specific process already in mind. It's a painful process because whatever is very time consuming or a lot of human errors or whatever, and they want to automate it because whenever a user is no longer doing it, it must mean it's efficient. But that's not the case, and they would usually be quite surprised when we come back with alternative suggestions as to what to do instead and how to improve the process. And in some cases, we don't even automate it at all because we managed to improve it to a point where it no longer makes sense to automate. It becomes efficient. It still maybe needs a human to a little bit of work, but just a bit, and that's usually enough of an improvement. In some cases, I've got there's a funny story that I've got with a single client that it was an actual existing client where we did some processes for them already, and they came to us asking me to automate a process of handling invoices from a supplier for late payments. So they've got a supplier where they buy goods from, and then they're usually late to pay for the goods, and they get an interest invoice afterwards for the late payment. and they wanted us to automate the process of just processing the late payment interest invoice and put it into their accounting system. And I'm like, no, we're not going to do that. That doesn't make sense. If you need to fix your payments process so you're no longer late to pay, and you won't be receiving these invoices at all. There's no point in automating them. And they were hesitant initially, but then we just exchanged some emails, and they eventually agreed, and they fixed their payments process instead. So they're no longer late. And then they just didn't even receive any of these invoices anymore. And that's also a misconception, where they just think that an inefficiency is something you can hide if you just put it on a bot on a virtual machine somewhere where people don't see it. Then they don't need to worry about it. But that's really not the case. And in order to fix that, you actually need to have a more of a holistic approach, a view of business processes, and not just understand the way you can automate processes. If you're only focusing on automation, then you're not seeing the big picture, and you might miss these possible improvements. So that's the biggest thing I see. And the other thing is then I'd say that, well, when I was working a lot with small companies, these small companies, especially companies that have already existed for some years but are still small, they haven't grown out, they haven't exploded, but they're also not a startup. They have been established some years ago. So they've got their processes, they've got plenty of them. They're usually quite complex. They have, over the years, they've kind of changed, but they've never implemented proper systems in place. So they've got complex processes, usually involving a lot of Excels and all of that stuff. But a small company, they will usually be afraid of fixing those processes, of actually reviewing them and improving them, or maybe installing or purchasing an ERP system or something to actually handle their Excels and so on. And they think they don't have the budget to actually do something like that, because that's for larger companies only. And so they come to us and asking if we can build RPA, solution so that at least we can automate some of those processes. But the thing is, usually, because of the complexity they have in their processes, an RPA solution would also be extremely complex. It is very hard to build something like that. It takes time. It requires a huge solution usually, just to cover their needs, and they don't want to change the process. But they will, when I come back with an estimate of what a solution like that would cost, they then realize that this is actually more expensive than actually fixing the process first. But that's also a common misconception, because everyone thinks that RPA is the cheap way of doing things. But it really isn't. If the process is inefficient, if it's not properly streamlined and standardized, it is actually more expensive to try to automate all of the inefficiencies than it would if we just fixed the process first and then automated an efficient process. So they usually end up saying that, we don't have the budget because we're too small, we're already inefficient, we don't earn enough money to actually cover the cost of building a solution like this. And that's also one of the reasons why I have significantly reduced the number of small businesses that I work with, is because, unless they have the correct mindset and agree to actually fix their processes first, they also cannot afford automation either.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing your insights on that. You have already mentioned you have built a standardization towards using the queue mechanism, and I heard you conducting some sessions on error handling, like best practices on error handling using Power Platform. So what kind of can you please elaborate more on standardizing, improving, and optimizing business processes that you guys take care at your current organization?
Well, these things that you've mentioned here they're actually related to having a standardized framework for actually building our own flows, in Power Automate. So, when the thing that UiPath has out of the box, for instance, we have built something like that for ourselves in Power Automate as well. So we have a framework for the database and the whole work queue management functionality, and also the framework for the entire flow as well. So we've got a standard framework. We just copy and paste it into a new environment when we need to build a new flow. And then, we just add the custom pieces based on the business rules. So that's a standardization of actually building RPA flows using Power Automate. We had to build it ourselves because it doesn't come out of the box. But now that we have it, I can build a simple, web automation flow within a couple of hours usually, or something like that, which would normally take at least a day or two. For instance, the one I was doing it in the tech conferences. I was demoing a flow of a personal flow where I'm just automating a flow that checks a Lego set, a price of the Lego set on Lego.com that I would like to buy, and checks if it has a discount. So that's a simple flow, but it took me like an hour to build. But it is in our standardized framework, it has plenty of subflows. It works very well and runs seamlessly. But if I had built that from scratch, it would take me at least a couple of days. But because I have the standardized framework, it takes me an hour to build something like that. So that's the idea. I do that because of two reasons. First of all, reducing the developer hours needed to actually build something. And the other thing is the fact that when I have a team, I want all of our flows built for all of our customers follow the same structure. Meaning that even if one person builds it, but another person needs to provide support or maintenance because the author, they're sick, they're on vacation, they may have left the company or something. Still easily provide whatever support is needed because we can easily navigate the flow. It's still under the same structure. So that's the approach we use to building our flows, but it really also resembles the way we work with process improvement as well. We see processes as something that needs to be standardized and improved and made efficient as much as possible before we can all try to automate it. And that's also a message I've been conveying in every single speech I've made in every single conference.
Okay, yeah, that's pretty cool. And do you think to productionize these reusable or standard components that you and your team have built?
I've actually been asked about that. Well, I've been talking about a framework for handling errors and logging in Power Automate Desktop, which is a major part of the standard functions that we have, and I've described it in some tech events. And I've actually been asked by some people whether I would share it or selling it at the moment. But thinking of doing a sort of workshop kind of a thing in a few events coming next year. If they actually accept that as a thing, I'll actually be doing these workshops where I'll be showing the attendees on how to build a framework like that from scratch, so that they can actually build a reusable component framework for Power Automate Desktop. That's one of the things I'm thinking of. I'm also thinking of doing some, teaching, training to, possibly businesses, but also possibly, just people who would like to become developers. So that might also become a thing. I'm not really thinking of selling these as a product, but more of a, doing training. And in some cases that would probably be paid, if I was actually doing one-on-one kind of consultancy or training or doing it for companies, then it would probably be like a service. Or, I'm probably going to do some workshops in events, some of which might actually be just free community events, like in the Power Platform user groups that have summits, every now and then. So I might do that, which will actually be free of charge in some cases.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, the idea, the question came to my mind because there can be sub-components or a sub-product feature that can be built and which is ready to use. People, if they want to incorporate it, they can easily go to a marketplace or a common repository where you place all these kind of products, and they can download and plug and play kind of stuff. But
yeah, I know what you mean. I just, haven't really thought of, I have thought about it, but I just don't really want to go that way of actually selling it as a product, because it, while me and my team have actually worked on building this for a few years and we think it's quite efficient, I do believe that it's still, our view of the best practice. It might still, I might actually hear another expert developer, if they attended my workshop and have some ideas for how to improve that, and that might actually make my product even better. But so I feel like delivering this to people in sort of workshop training kind of things is a better idea than selling it as a product. So I like that point more than just productizing it.
Yeah, even that makes sense. And the kind of validation you get with exposing these products or these standard features to a larger audience and then seeking feedback from them.
Yeah.
That works. Yeah. With that, coming to the next question, I would like you to throw some light or the insights that you have on the future of RPA. Where do you see RPA heading, especially in terms of innovation, scalability, and the impact that it has across various industries?
Okay, well, I've seen quite a few people, talking recently, at least in the past couple of years, about RPA. Not going to how it's not going to stick around for very long because it's just patchwork or macros on steroids or whatever. Lots of people just talking down on it. Some of them are influential voices in the fields of AI or whatever, but some are just not that knowledgeable maybe. But the way I see it is that Well, in a perfect world, we wouldn't need RPA, because, if we had everything properly digitized in all of business processes and all businesses actually using modern systems and proper integrations, then we wouldn't need RPA. But the reality is that, that's not really the case. We don't really live in a perfect world like that. And I don't think we will in, anytime soon. There will always be legacy systems being used by businesses. There will always be, inefficient processes used by businesses, files, different systems that do not integrate well with one another being used by different businesses who interact with one another as client and supplier or partner or whatever. And so there will always be some sort of a need for this sort of automation. Obviously, it could also be done by just traditional programming in some cases, but that's also not a thing that could possibly replace RPA, because RPA is a thing that that can be done faster and less intrusively to the existing systems, and it also something that works better as a temporary solution. So if for instance a business actually decides to upgrade their ERP system or whatever, and that's a project that could take a year or two, because depending on the size of the business, maybe even longer than that, and they would use RPA as an interim solution while the project is ongoing. So there's plenty of room, and I don't see RPA going down any time in the next at least a decade or something. I think it might consolidate a bit in terms of there's being less players in the market, some being acquired, some or merged with others, some just disappearing and so on, because there's probably quite a bit too many of them. And when Microsoft entered the market, I think it disrupted it quite significantly with the way it's priced its products. So it's now being it's now probably harder for those products or companies that are not in the top to actually make their way into the market. But those that are already in the top, I think they're pretty safe for quite some time. Like UiPath and Automation Anywhere and Blue Prism, they're probably safe. I just see that it's also being disrupted quite a bit by AI, by generative AI, and all similar possibilities by that. But I'm also just seeing that as a way for us to just make it improve the way we work and make it easier for us to build stuff and actually incorporate AI functionalities into RPA, or use AI to make it easier for us to come up with a solution, like write a script that we need in our RPA flow or something like that. So, recent updates to Power Automate even, just, allow using natural language to transfer to code right in Power Automate desktop, So if I need a Python script in my flow, I can just, use generative AI to generate that script for me. So that makes it easier for me to create a flow that actually uses some more advanced functionalities than what's natively available. So I see that as, again, not something that will replace RPA, but something that will improve the life of RPA developers.
Yeah, definitely. So AI complements RPA, along with RPA plus AI, we can build very well end-to-end automation solutions. So yeah, that would be my take as well. I totally agree with you on this. What advice would you like to give to the RPA professionals out there? I wouldn't say RPA professional, I would call that term a broader term as automation developers. So what advice would you like to give to the automation developers out there?
Yeah, well, one thing that I've already mentioned was obviously having a bit of understanding of computer science and programming in general. So if they don't already have that, it might make sense to maybe take an online course or something on computer science or something like that. I remember I really loved the course on, may have been Coursera or something. It was CS50 by Harvard University, or maybe, that was one that I did actually take, but the one I actually loved was Introduction to Computer Science via Python or something like that by MIT. So that was something which both taught me the general basics of computer science, while also teaching me some Python programming. That was the basis of me, reskilling myself towards programming from finance. So, and I loved it, and it was very useful, and it helped me a lot to advance my career in RPA when I actually got to that. So I'd say if they haven't done anything like that, if they don't have any sort of background in IT or computer science, I'd suggest maybe taking a course or something to just broaden their understanding of what that works, and not thinking that just you can do everything with native actions. It does make sense to have some programming understanding as well in whatever language you choose. That doesn't really matter, because most of them can now be incorporated in most RPA tools. So that's really not that much important. And then the other thing is obviously, making use of the generative AI features that are now becoming more and more increasingly available. I don't think, they should just dismiss it as useless. That's not really the case. It helps a lot in both in terms of just, coming up with ideas of how to maybe streamline and make your flow more efficient, but also, even creating entire scripts or pieces of scripts that may be needed. It may not work the same way with every single RPA tool, but I'm pretty sure it will improve over time and become more efficient with that. It's not that great. And for instance, in Power Automate Desktop, you can't really just create an entire flow from natural language just yet. But with what Microsoft is doing with Copilot, I'm sure it will actually be there in a few months maybe, or at least a year or something like that. But I've heard that you can actually do a UiPath file, with ChatGPT. That was the case of a few months ago at least. So I'm pretty sure that's a great way to not really, lose a job or being replaced, but a great way to improve the way you work and the way, reduce the time needed for actually developing the flows that you work on.
Yeah, really good advice. So recent times we do have the capabilities in like Gen AI, right? You can create your own GPT and you can tie up. It's like creating your own flow or a model which works on generative AI, and you can tie up with your RPA process for any of your use case. So definitely learning Gen AI capabilities will definitely add some value to the existing skill set.
Yep.
So yeah, that's a really great piece of advice, and people should follow these things. One more thing I would like to ask you is, how open is the market for Power Automate in Europe? Like if someone from, let's say, India or Asian countries want to work for the companies that are located in Europe, via a remote job or via a sponsorship. So are there opportunities, and what is your view on that?
Well, I'm personally not that aware of, not that knowledgeable maybe on the market, on the job market itself. I haven't really looked for a job in a while now, but what I know is there are a couple of limitations in terms of when it comes to actual location, and if you're looking for a remote job, you should be an experienced developer, because companies usually do not take in junior developers or entry-level developers remotely. They would usually expect them to need to be physically there to actually interact with the team and learn from them, and maybe even be supervised a bit. So if you're looking for a remote job opportunity, you should be an experienced developer with at least a couple of years of experience with the specific tool that you want to work with, and not just any RPA tool. So that's a thing. When it comes to actually sponsoring or actually employing people who would actually come into the country in Europe, I think that might probably be, I've personally hired people that were foreigners as well in the past, but that wasn't India, that was Ukraine, which that was just a person who had actually already arrived to Lithuania, but was looking for a job and couldn't speak the language, but was a programmer, and it was perfectly fine. I'm pretty sure that's okay with most companies, but it depends, because some actually require speaking the language. It really depends on the industry and what the company does. For instance, for me as an agency, when we provide services, we frequently have to have people speaking the local language because the clients expect that. But if it's an internal organization, an internal RPA department in an organization, then it's usually okay to have foreigners as well. Maybe not so much in a governmental kind of organizations, but in just actual businesses, that should be fine, and I know people doing that. I also know some companies just outsourcing their RPA and IT departments to India and other Asian countries as well, because of the lower cost. But that's probably not what you would want anyway, because then you end up in a in a department that is actually created in your country. That's basically a company established in your country, so probably not as much of a better pay or anything. Companies would do that in order to save costs. So you'd probably be better off trying to find an employment contract or something like that directly in a company that's a Western company.
Yeah,
but I'm not that familiar with the market overall. I'm just just shooting out some random ideas here.
Yeah, even that would help because I keep on getting this query a lot. People approach me like in general programming, there are ways to get remote job in Python programming, or if Java or .NET. General programming, there are ways to crack few rounds, for example DSA and other coding rounds, and they get a remote opportunity. The people ask me if there is something similar in RPA, or they can get such kind of opportunity. So that's where I got this point. But yeah, I mean, you can only speak from your company's requirement, or the requirement that you have been getting, rather than speaking on the entire European region requirement. Totally agree.
I think it's also because of it's a difference in terms of how many people we've got, or what's the supply of actual developers in the technology. So when it comes to Python, for instance, if we're hiring an experienced Python developer, there's arguably not that many of them, actual senior programmers in Python that are good at their job and that you can find in your local market, for instance. When it comes to RPA, there's usually quite a few, because lots of them are just reskilled people that started up with something else, and then they've moved on to RPA, and now it may have been different a couple of years ago, but it's now there's plenty of people doing RPA for at least 2 to 3 years. So then the supply is higher, meaning that the competition is also higher. And then we also have quite a few of them. When it comes to Europe, there's quite a few coming from actual European countries that are also considered to be lower cost countries, like Romania, for instance, which is where UiPath was born. So there's a lot of Romanian RPA developers, and quite good, at least at UiPath and similar tech. And they're also, kind of considered to be slightly, cheaper in terms of overall in Europe, as well as, Ukraine, which is, now war-torn in Europe. And then there's a lot of people being just, relocated and having to leave their country, and then trying to find jobs in wherever they are. But Ukrainians have also been known as being quite good at programming in the past. So there's a lot of that in Europe as well. So I don't think there's a shortage of RPA developers here, and that's why it might be harder to get in from an Asian country or something like that when you need a sponsorship or something or like that. If you don't actually need sponsorship, and you can actually figure out your own way of actually traveling and getting a visa and something like that, and you don't expect the company to cover that, then you have better chances at when compared to others who also don't need that but have maybe moved from Romania or something like that.
Thanks for sharing your thoughts on this, and it would really help people who be viewing this. With that, I would like to thank you, really thank you from the bottom of my heart for getting time out of your busy schedule and making this happen. So really thanks a lot for this conversation.
Thank you. It was great talking to you. It was an interesting and some challenging and thought-provoking questions from you, and I hope to also see I'll be following your podcast, and I can see that it will probably be valuable content, and I'm hoping to see some other great speakers here as well. Thanks.
Sure. Thanks Agnish. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.